Nia's heart raced as Richard slammed the eviction papers into her hands. His eyes were cold, distant, almost as if this was just another transaction, another piece of paper to sign. The thick, official document was like a weight in her chest, suffocating her. It read, "Eviction notice. Immediate action required." "Pack up and leave by the end of the week," Richard said, his tone flat, as though he had just told her to take out the trash. The sound of the rain pelting against the window seemed to intensify, as if the storm outside was mirroring the storm inside her. She stood frozen on the threshold of her apartment, her fingers trembling as she held the notice. Richard, the landlord, was already walking away, his back to her, as if he had already won. But Nia wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She glanced back into the apartment, at the walls that had witnessed her family's life. It had been her home, her sanctuary, her pride. She could almost hear the echoes of her son James playing in the hallway, the place where she had cried when she lost her husband, the place where she had smiled through the tears as she raised James alone. This wasn't just an eviction. This was everything she had worked for, the last piece of her life, being taken away by a man who didn't care about the people in this building, who didn't care that this was her home. "Not today," Nia whispered under her breath, her resolve hardening. The door clicked shut behind her, but the coldness from the outside world seemed to creep into her apartment. The eviction notice wasn't just paperwork, it was a symbol of something much worse, gentrification. The building wasn't just sold, it was targeted. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, that gnawing fear that she wasn't just facing eviction. She was facing a battle that had already been lost by so many before her. She was being pushed out, not because she had done anything wrong, but because of the color of her skin. Because her home didn't belong to the right people anymore. Nia quickly wiped away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. She couldn't break down now, not with James inside, not when she was the only one who could fight back. She grabbed her phone. Carlos, the community organizer. She'd seen him at the town meetings, seen the way he rallied people to fight back against developers like Richard. He had always been the voice of reason, the one person who wasn't afraid to stand up. Her fingers shook as she dialed the number. The phone rang. "Hello?" Carlos answered. There was a moment's pause, then Nia's voice broke through, raw and tired. "Carlos, it's happening. I need your help." Carlos listened for a moment before speaking. "You knew this was coming, Nia. It's the whole neighborhood they're after. We've got to stand up, but we need to get the word out. I'll help you, but you've got to be ready. This isn't just about saving your home anymore. It's about fighting back." Nia's breath caught. She had been living in fear of this moment for months, but now it was real. "What do we do?" Carlos's voice was steady. "We fight. We make noise. We expose the truth, and we make sure Richard knows that he can't just push us out." Nia's mind raced. She had never been the type to make waves, never been the one to stand up and fight back. But this time, she had no choice. If she didn't act now, it would be too late. She couldn't let her son grow up in a world where they were pushed around by people like Richard, by people who saw them as disposable. "Okay, let's do it," Nia said, a new fire in her voice. The next morning, she showed up at the town hall meeting. The room was packed with residents, most of them familiar faces she had lived alongside for years. She sat quietly at the back, trying to steady her nerves. She had come here for one reason. She scanned the room. Richard sat in the front row, smug and self-assured. Behind him, the city council members whispered amongst themselves, probably deciding how much money they could squeeze out of the developers. But today, they would hear her. When it was her turn to speak, Nia walked up to the podium, the spotlight feeling too bright on her face. The room grew quiet. She swallowed hard, then spoke, her voice steady but fierce. "This neighborhood isn't just a place to make a quick profit. It's our home. These walls have witnessed our lives. We've fought, we've cried, we've loved. But now, because of greed, we're being pushed out. For what? So that rich people can turn our homes into fancy condos?" There was a murmur in the room. Some people nodded, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Richard didn't flinch. He simply crossed his arms, his lips curling into a small smile. The following days were a blur of petitions, meetings, and protests. The press started to pick up the story. More people rallied around Nia, each person adding their voice to the growing tide of opposition to Richard's plan. The neighborhood, once resigned to its fate, was finally fighting back. But it wasn't enough yet. The pressure kept mounting. Richard was determined to make an example of Nia, to show that no one was safe. The fight wasn't over, and Nia knew that. But one thing had changed. She wasn't backing down anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. Nia had never been this busy in her life, signing petitions, meeting with Carlos, gathering support from neighbors. The pressure to fight back against Richard's plans weighed on her, but every time she felt the doubts creeping in, she saw James' face. He was the reason she was pushing forward. She had to fight for him, for his future, for a world where he wasn't told where he could live based on how much money he had. Carlos called one afternoon, his voice more urgent than usual. "Nia, I've got some news. Richard's lawyers are pushing forward with the eviction. They filed a motion, and they're taking you to court next week." Her heart sank, but she wasn't surprised. Richard wasn't going to back down without a fight. "What does that mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It means the pressure's about to get a lot worse. But we're not backing down. I've already got a legal team on this. We'll dig into Richard's dealings, find anything we can use to turn this around." The day of the court hearing arrived faster than Nia expected. The building, the city hall, felt like a fortress. The oppressive walls, the hard wooden benches, it all felt so official, so impersonal. As Nia walked through the doors, the weight of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. But she wasn't walking alone. Carlos was beside her, and Amira, the lawyer, had already arrived with the rest of the legal team. Nia didn't know what to expect. She had heard stories of landlords bulldozing through the legal system, pushing people like her into impossible situations. Richard had money, power, and influence, and Nia had hope. Hope wasn't much when you were up against a system that didn't care about you, but it was all she had left. She took a deep breath as the judge walked in, a sharp-faced woman with a look that seemed to see straight through people. The gavel came down, and the room fell silent. Richard was already seated with his team of lawyers, a smug grin on his face. He seemed completely in control of the room, like he had already won. Nia stood at the front, trying to steady her breathing, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes on her. It was like she was invisible to everyone except Richard and his team, but that would change. It had to. Amira stood up first, presenting their case. "Your Honor, we're here today to challenge the eviction of Nia Brooks, a mother who has lived in this building for over 10 years. We have reason to believe that this eviction is not just a matter of lease violations, but a case of racial discrimination. The landlord's actions are not only unethical, they violate housing laws." Nia could feel Richard's eyes burning into the back of her neck. He wasn't taking this seriously. But Amira wasn't done. Richard Harrington, the landlord, has systematically targeted tenants of color, offering them buyouts at unfairly low prices and using tactics designed to push them out of the neighborhood. This is about greed. This is about gentrification. It's not about eviction. It's about pushing out people who don't have the resources to fight back. The courtroom fell silent. Nia could see Richard shift in his seat, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. But he didn't respond. Instead, his lawyer stood up to challenge the accusations, arguing that Nia's rent hadn't been paid on time and that her family had violated the terms of the lease. But Amira didn't flinch. "These are lies. We have bank statements proving that Nia has paid every cent of her rent. Richard's claims are fabricated, and his attempts to force her out of her home are part of a broader pattern that we will expose in this court." The hearing stretched on for hours, and Nia could feel her strength waning. Every word spoken by Richard's lawyers felt like another blow to the chest, like they were erasing everything she stood for. They tried to paint her as the villain, the difficult tenant. But she knew the truth. She wasn't the one causing trouble. It was the system that was broken. As the proceedings dragged on, Nia felt the weight of her emotions pulling her down. Doubt was starting to creep in again. Was this all a waste? Could she really win this? She thought about James, his small face full of hope. He had no idea how close they were to losing everything. He was too young to understand how much of a fight this was, but she couldn't afford to show him weakness. She had to keep going. The judge finally called a break, and the courtroom emptied, leaving Nia and her team standing in a sea of people who had no idea what it meant to be caught in the gears of a system that didn't care about them. Amira leaned over to her. "Don't worry, we're not done yet. We have one more thing we're going to bring up." "What's that?" Nia asked, confused. Amira's lips curled into a small smile. "We're going to expose Richard's involvement in the development deal. He's been working with the developer who's been buying up these buildings. We have evidence that he's been working with them from the beginning, that his intentions were always to evict people like you." The hours felt like days as the judge deliberated, the courtroom emptying out around Nia. She sat quietly, barely able to hold her thoughts together. Every time her mind wandered, she found herself back at the apartment, at the threshold of the life she had built, the life she was about to lose. Carlos stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't talking. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment was pressing down on all of them. Amira was sitting at the lawyer's table, flipping through her notes. She met Nia's eyes, and there was something in her gaze, something resolute. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. The sound of heels clicking on the marble floor broke through the quiet. Richard strolled back into the room, flanked by his lawyers, his posture cocky, like he already knew the outcome. He was about to win. But Nia wasn't giving up. The doors opened, and the judge entered. The room fell into complete silence as she took her seat at the bench, her eyes scanning the documents in front of her. She didn't speak immediately, letting the tension settle in. Finally, she cleared her throat. "We are here today to review the eviction case brought by Richard Harrington against Nia Brooks and her family. The question before us is whether the actions taken by Mr. Harrington constitute racial discrimination, and whether the eviction process adhered to legal and ethical standards." Nia's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The judge looked down at her papers. "After careful consideration, we have found that there is indeed enough evidence to suggest that Mr. Harrington's actions were not simply a matter of business, but were targeted at specific tenants based on their race and financial status." She paused, letting the words settle in the air. Richard's face went white. He hadn't expected this. His usual air of confidence faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Enough for Nia to see that she had been right. His entire plan was built on exploiting the neighborhood's vulnerabilities. "Therefore," the judge continued, her voice firm, "the eviction of Nia Brooks is hereby suspended, and a full investigation into Mr. Harrington's practices will be conducted." She slammed her gavel down. The room erupted into a mixture of gasps, cheers, and murmurs. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nia allowed herself to breathe. She had won. She hadn't just saved her apartment. She had exposed a system that had been working against her for so long. But Richard wasn't done. He stood up, his face flushed with rage. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice shaking with fury. "You'll regret this. You can't just ruin my business and walk away like nothing happened." Nia met his gaze without flinching. "You're right. This isn't over, but I'm done letting you destroy my home, my life, and the lives of everyone around me." Carlos stepped forward, standing by her side, a silent strength in the face of Richard's threats. "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." Richard turned to leave, his pride stinging as he stormed out of the room. Nia had won. As Nia stepped out of the courthouse, a sense of relief flooded over her. She could hardly believe it. The fight was over. For now. But the battle wasn't just for her home. It had become something bigger, something that could change the way the community fought for their rights. Carlos clapped her on the back. "You did it. You did more than fight for your home. You fought for everyone else who's been pushed out. You made people see what was happening." Amira smiled at Nia, her eyes proud. "We did it together. This victory is bigger than just one apartment. It's about showing people that they can fight back against the system." Nia looked around at the people gathered outside the courthouse, neighbors, friends, people who had once been silent but now stood with her, shoulders back, heads held high. They had made their voices heard. As they walked back to the apartment, Nia felt a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. James was waiting for her at the door, his small face lighting up when he saw her. She knelt down to his level, pulling him into a hug. "We're staying," she whispered. Her son smiled, his arms wrapping tightly around her. It was a simple moment, but one that meant everything. She looked up at the apartment building, at the walls that had once seemed like prison bars, but now they felt like a shield that had protected her and her family through this entire fight. This place, this home, was theirs, and nothing could take it from them. Here brings us to the end of the story. If you enjoyed this journey in the fight for justice, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop a comment and let us know. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more powerful stories to light.